Groundwater, of course, is an important resource. 30% of freshwater resources in the Earth systems comes from groundwater. But the challenge is that groundwater is an invisible resource. So we cannot see it. So we are also not managing it properly. So to understand these dynamics, I'm using variety of data-based methods and numerical modelings to look at these types of interactions. Okay, so what I do at UC Riverside, my research program in the past few years have been focused on 4 main research areas. The main one is understanding hydrological processes in the mountainous environments, because these are the water towers. And hydrological processes in these systems are very complex. So we are using a variety of in situ observations and modeling approaches to understand them. Being in California is difficult to avoid agricultural systems, you know. So some of my research is focused on understanding of eco-hydrological processes of agricultural ecosystems and applying numerical methods and models for water supply forecasting in these systems. And of course, it's difficult to ignore the impact of droughts in the hydrologic system. So some of my research also focus on how the droughts propagate through the subsurface. And finally, to investigate these resources, besides observational data, we are also using numerical methods, which some of these numerical models are computationally expensive. So we also try to develop efficient hydrologic modeling approaches to simulate processes at a larger scale, from watershed to regional or continental scale, because that's the scale that basically big management decisions would happen. What do we do as a hydrologist? So we are interested to understand terrestrial hydrological processes, evapotranspiration, groundwater recharge, runoff generation across the landscape. And to do that, we are using variety of observational data set, you know, the boreholes, you know, stream flow gauging stations. And the past several decades, we have access to the plethora of remote sensing platforms that observing the Earth system, you know, continuously, so they could provide information about how basically precipitation partitions between these various components of the water budget. But no matter whether I'm using in situ observations or satellite data, it's very difficult to characterize spatial and temporal variability of hydrological processes using observations only. You know, if you put a soil moisture sensor, you know, how representative of moisture condition in the soil system is that soil moisture. Or if I'm using a satellite product, the spatial resolution of a SMAP is 36 kilometers. That's not a scale that is relevant for agricultural water management. So we somehow need to bridge this gap between point observations and satellite observations, and numerical models can serve as the main tool to bridge this gap in our observations. And as a hydrologist, we traditionally treated our surface water and groundwater systems separately. Even my title at UCR is groundwater hydrologist, while actually I'm looking at the interface between surface water and groundwater connections. And we knew about this connectivity even in 1969, when Fries and Harlan published their seminal paper on, you know, a blueprint for a physically based, digitally simulated hydrologic model. They basically were arguing that surface water and groundwater systems are integrated. We have, you know, equations like shallow surface water equations for the surface flow. We have the Richards equation for the subsurface. So we should couple these and treat the hydrologic system as an integrated, holistic system. It was a great idea, but at the time, we didn't have computational resources to do these types of simulations, particularly at a larger scale. But now we have, high performance computing that we could run these models at a continental scale and make predictions. However, in the past few years also, there has been a lot of advances in critical zone scientists that they were trying to integrate not only hydrological processes, but integrate processes such as weathering, soil structure, biogeochemical fluxes, and identify the role of these processes on regulating the fluxes of water and energy on the landscape. So therefore, what we want to integrate more models because our ultimate goal is to understand how the Earth system basically would respond to changes in climate variability. So we have these models, from that works at the spatial scale of a few meters, looking at microbial and biogeochemical processes, and at very short time scale, to models that, as you move across this scale, bring more complexity, looking at processes at the landscape, and finally, global scale. So therefore, we want to integrate more data and observations basically to understand these types of processes. But of course, natural systems, we don't have pristine ecosystems anymore. Humans have been altering the terrestrial hydrologic system considerably, and we are the agents of change to the extent that humans have created these anthropogenic biomes. We will see the expansion of urban areas, expansion of irrigated agriculture. So beyond climate, geological factors, and others, human activities are also changing our hydrologic systems. There was a paper published in 2021 in Nature Communications outlining that about a third of the global land area has changed between 1960 to 2019. That's a lot of change. And majority of the change, actually, you could guess, was the expansion of croplands by about 1 million square kilometers across the globe. So we are expanding the croplands because we want to provide food for the growing population. That would mean that we need more water resources. Actually, irrigated agriculture is the largest consumer of freshwater resources. And depending on the region, we might be using surface water or groundwater or both to provide water for agricultural productions. In the US, actually, 65% of total groundwater withdrawals are used for irrigation. There was a study published in Nature Geoscience in 2012 that they tried to map the global distribution of groundwater depletion, around the globe. And as you can see, majority of the areas that we observe groundwater depletions coincide with major agricultural regions around the globe. And indeed, they said water extraction for irrigation is the major cause of groundwater depletion. And of course, California and Texas are also highlighted in this map too. I did another overlay with this global map focusing on mountain valley aquifer systems. Actually, if you overlay this map here with the global distribution of groundwater depletion, you will see that regions that we are experiencing groundwater depletion coincide with mountain valley aquifer systems. And there was a paper published in 2020 in Nature outlining that about 50% of mountain areas support downstream water supply. However, in these types of investigation, people mostly using surface water runoff that is generated from mountainous environment, because these regions, we have a snowpack, so more water would be produced. What they ignore is actually, besides surface water, mountains also have their own aquifer unit, and they could be served as a major water supply in terms of groundwater recharge to the valley aquifers. So the second part of my talk will focus on understanding groundwater recharge processes in the mountainous environment. So I blamed humans as the major factor, depleting our aquifers. But of course, as you know, our climate system is also changing. And there was a paper published in 2018 using GRACE satellite data, looking at the trends in terrestrial water storage, which means if you add the total amount of snow, soil moisture, and groundwater as the terrestrial water storage, and looking at the trend in the past 20 years, you see some areas that we see significant decline in terrestrial water storage. And of course, again, California and Texas are among the hottest spots. And the reason for this decline, some of it is related to groundwater depletion and some related to droughts. Therefore, also it's very difficult to separate the impact of climate from land use activities, particularly in these coupled natural human systems. Why it is difficult to detect the impact of climate on groundwater, the reason for it is, first of all, we can see groundwater system. Even if we have observation wells, groundwater aquifer, groundwater flows very slowly. Therefore, the aquifers have a very long residence time, and it takes time for any change on the surface to propagate to the subsurface. And unfortunately, we don't have a good understanding of how long does it take, for example, for droughts to propagate to our groundwater system. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on 3 main studies trying to understand these climate groundwater feedbacks. First, looking at how long does it take for groundwater to respond to drought and recover from it. And as you know, groundwater also is a major water supply for our streams. So in the next study, we are looking at the base flow, which is the contribution of groundwater to the stream and how droughts impact base flow. And finally, looking at mountain valley aquifer systems, because these are the areas that we observe significant groundwater depletion, and quantifying groundwater recharge in this system is important. But how do we define droughts? If you look at the literature, number of definitions have been used for droughts: agricultural droughts, meteorological droughts, even anthropogenic droughts, groundwater droughts. And we often use different types of indices to define droughts. And as you can see, based on the figure here, depending on the type of index that we use, the spatial distribution of the drought patterns would be very different. I don't have a solution for it, but one thing that I can advocate is that we always need to be very clear in terms of type of indices that we use to characterize these droughts. And I'm going to focus on groundwater drought and base flow drought in this presentation. And our goal is to look at how basically our aquifer systems are responding to the droughts. Is there a lag between precipitation droughts and groundwater drought? And how long does it take for our aquifers to recover? I remember when I started at UC Riverside in 2016, it was right after the California drought, and someone from the public just walked into my office and said, "Is the drought over?" I'm like, I don't know. Yes, because we had a very, wet season. And I'm like, no, but I didn't have, quantitative information to, respond to that citizen. So that's, guided me to basically maybe looking at this research question. So what we did, we looked at data from observation wells in climate response network. These are the wells that are not impacted by human activities. The impact of pumping is low. As you can see, we don't have many examples in Texas and California. These are the wells that are tapped into our unconfined aquifer systems. And what we did, we end up using 266 wells across the country and use the precipitation time series and groundwater time series, try to identify groundwater droughts as well as precipitation droughts, and then looking at the relations between them. So how we did, in the first graph, you'll see that we computed accumulated precipitation anomalies, which basically computes the deviation of monthly precipitation from the monthly mean. So when you have more negative values, meaning that we are during the droughts, we have the precipitation deficit. We did the same thing with the groundwater time series as well, and then try to identify the drought periods. So these areas that are in red are the regions that's, identified as precipitation droughts. However, if you look at the groundwater drought, you will see there is some sort of a lag between the beginning of groundwater droughts and, beginning of precipitation droughts. And of course, it takes a little bit longer for groundwater droughts to end. So we try to characterize these lag times, and then finally looking at the aquifer recovery. How long does it take for the aquifer to go back to the pre-drought condition? So doing these calculations across 266 wells, we show that on average, it takes about 20 months, let's say 2 years, for precipitation droughts to propagate to the groundwater drought. So maybe your precipitation drought comes and it's over, but the aquifer hasn't experienced the precipitation deficit yet. So that is important. The second thing is there is also a lot of variability in this lag time. As you would expect, in the eastern part of US that we have, higher precipitation, this lag time between the beginning of precipitation drought and groundwater drought is shorter. However, as we move towards drier condition, this lag time becomes longer, and they could vary sometimes up to 15 years. So these lag times, therefore, have important implications for water resources management, because you may have the precipitation drought ended. That's what happened in California. They removed all the water conservation measures, not recognizing that our groundwater systems haven't recovered yet. Then we used a machine learning model to understand, what are the factors that control these, lag time. And we looked at a number of climate properties and geographic properties. It turns out that the main factor that controls the lag time is basically drought intensity during the lag time. How severe is the drought event? What is the deviation of precipitation from that normal condition? And when we are looking at the geographic properties, it seemed mean annual recharge was the main factor. Then we looked at recovery time. Okay, if it takes a long time for this drought to propagate, how long does it take for groundwater to recover? On average, if you are looking at continental scale data, it takes about 3 years for groundwater to recover. But in most cases, actually, this lag time could be longer, maybe 10 years. And in some cases, we had 30 years of data. The groundwater never recovered from the droughts. We then wanted to understand the groundwater recovery process. So we started looking at, grouping these different sites based on the amount of mean annual recharge. As you would expect, in regions that mean annual recharge is much higher, these lighter blue area, the recovery is way faster compared to areas that are drier and recharge is lower. Similarly, in regions that groundwater level is deep, it takes longer for water to percolate through the vadose zone and get to the aquifer, so recovery becomes longer. Then we also looked at what are the factors that controls the recovery process, and it turns out that the drought severity and the amount of groundwater depletion during the drought controls the recovery process. So therefore, the question is, if we would expect as a result of climate change, droughts are going to become more intense and severe, we would expect that the groundwater recovery process also would be longer. But also global climate models predict that the frequency of flood events also could increase in the future. So hopefully might be a trade-off between declining in the precipitations versus the flood events, but we don't know, and more studies are required. So far what I've shown is that the precipitation, there is a lag between precipitation droughts and groundwater droughts. This lag could be up to 15 years, and it takes a long time for groundwater to recover from the droughts. And of course, this would have important implications for water management. In the next phase, we are going to look at now base flow droughts, because base flow basically is groundwater discharge to the streams. And what we did is, for the base flow drought, we looked at 358 catchments or watersheds across the US and try to develop a new framework for drought detection at an event scale. Most of the drought studies previously, they've been looking at the cross correlations between the precipitation time series and groundwater time series or base flow. But these types of studies only give you general information about droughts propagation. So we needed a framework for event scale drought detection. So we used a new index to determine precipitation droughts, and also use the standardized base flow index to determine base flow drought. And similar to the groundwater study, we started looking at these lag time between precipitation drought and base flow droughts. So our results showed that, in terms of precipitation droughts across these 358 catchments, the duration of droughts varies from 9 months up to 104 months, but on average, duration of precipitation droughts across the continental US is about 2 years. And then if you are looking at the base flow droughts, we also observe similar patterns. The average duration is a slightly longer, 23 months. Next step, we were interested to look at the lag time. How long does it take for precipitation droughts to impact base flow drought? And as you can see, the lag time now is much shorter. It's about 3 months, while for groundwater was about 2 years. So our streams are responding to the droughts way faster than our groundwater systems. We then also looked at the intensity of precipitation droughts and base flow droughts. And as you can see, while the intensity of precipitation drought in most of the country is quite low, the influence on the base flow droughts could be quite high. Because as the precipitation decreases, other hydrological processes are also changing, influencing the base flow response to the droughts. Finally, we wanted to identify what are the factors that basically controls these variations in the base flow drought intensity and severity. So here we are comparing base flow index, which is the amount of base flow related to the total stream flow. So in catchments that the base flow index are higher means that they are more dominated by groundwater. So if a catchment is more dominated by groundwater, the severity of base flow drought is lower, which makes sense because the groundwater storage creates some sort of a buffering capacity for the system. Also, the intensity of the base flow droughts also related to the intensity of the droughts, precipitation droughts. If you have a more severe precipitation drought, your base flow drought would be more severe as well. Then we're also looking at our recovery of base flow drought because we want to know how long does it take for our streams to recover from the droughts. And then you can see here, on average, the base flow recovery takes about 11 months, so much shorter than groundwater. And of course, we observe variability across the country. And the main factor that controls these recovery depends on how much basically precipitation happens during the recovery process. We also looked at decadal changes in precipitation drought and base flow droughts. And here you see that in the mild temperate zone was a region that it showed that there is significant differences in base flow droughts during these 2 decades. That means that in the mild temperate zone, our base flow droughts are becoming more severe. So that will have important implications for climate impact on water resources. So in summary, as you can see, precipitation droughts exert a strong control on groundwater and subsequently influence base flow response, and some watersheds may not ever recover from a drought. Now let's move on to the final part of my talk, focusing on recharge processes in mountain valley aquifer systems. Just want to make sure I'm not over time. Okay. Why I'm focusing mostly on the droughts and the drought processes, because we are living in, this western part of US, and the western part of US have experienced significant droughts, particularly in recent years. Here, the figure on the left shows changes in the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada. We see a lot of variability, but seems the system is getting drier. And the figure on the right is from the GRACE satellite observations trying to quantify changes in groundwater storage. The red color means that we had significant groundwater depletion in California as a result of the recent droughts. And we've been using our aquifer systems significantly, and this resulted actually in the passage of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in California in 2014. What does it mean is that now the producers in Central Valley aquifers have to develop groundwater sustainability plans to basically avoid having significant depletions in the next drought. The question is, can we achieve groundwater sustainability in these types of systems that are significantly impacted by droughts, but also we have human factors that their well-being are tied to the water resources? While as a hydrologist, I could say, well, maybe if you give me the projections of climate, I could predict what happens in the future in the natural system. It's very difficult to predict what human beings are going to do. The way that we are making decisions of what I'm going to have for lunch today, how far ahead of time what is your lunch going to be on Monday, right? So detecting this human, decision-making process is difficult, but besides that, there is also legal and economic consideration, and we need to work not only with hydrologists, soil scientists, but also social scientists to understand these dynamics between natural and human systems. I decided to work on the mountain valley aquifer systems and try to understand, groundwater recharge processes in this system, because these are the regions that are also heavily impacted by droughts. If you are looking at, one variety of major aquifers in the US, you will see that the distribution of groundwater recharge pathways is very different. And I'm focusing on mountainous areas because these are the regions that receive higher precipitation, particularly in the form of snow. And if there is going to be less snow in the future, the question is how groundwater recharge processes will change in these regions. But the problems with the mountainous environment is that, we often don't have observational data in these systems. Hydrological processes are very complex, and recharge also consists of multiple pathways as are represented in this figure. So we have precipitation that is infiltrates through the mountain bedrock, which we refer to as mountain aquifer recharge. We may have surface water bodies, streams and lakes recharging the mountain aquifer unit. But then from the mountains, we have these mountainous streams that come to the valley floor and infiltrates at the mountain front. At the same time, we have mountain block recharge, which is the lateral flow from the mountain aquifer to the valley aquifer. So as you can see, within a mountain valley aquifer systems, there are multiple pathways. In the valley aquifer, besides precipitation recharge, there is a lot of irrigation happening as well. And in one hand, we try to make our irrigation systems more efficient to use less water, but at the same time, we are also reducing the amount of recharge to the groundwater. So identifying those trades-off becomes important. So previously, people have been using empirical equations or simple water balance models to characterize groundwater recharge in mountainous environment. So we decided to focus on these regions. So to accurately predict recharge, we need to have good meteorological data. Here shows the variability in precipitation across 4 different meteorological products that are commonly used in hydrologic modeling. As you can see, these won't agree with each other, particularly in the mountainous area. So to assess the influence of these variability in meteorological forcing, we established a hydrologic observatory in the southern Sierra Nevada, the Coahuilla River watershed. And actually this watershed is became part of the NRCS SEEP watershed network. The idea is to develop management strategy to conserve groundwater. But in order to have better management strategy, we need to better understand hydrologic systems in this region. So I got some funding from NSF as part of my NSF career to look at the upland area, and NRCS funding the valley aquifers so we could better understand these systems. While I was expecting to see differences in the precipitation product, as you can see, here is the annual precipitation from these 4 different products for 2016. I was surprised to see even there are differences in temperature products, because the temperature prediction seems to be more reliable. So then we did a numerical experiment, said let's use an integrated hydrologic model and assess how this uncertainty in precipitation and temperature propagates through the hydrologic system. We use a modeling package called PARFlow, which is an integrated surface water, groundwater, atmospheric model. Basically, it uses the 3D recharge equation for the subsurface, is integrated with an overland flow to simulate runoff, is coupled to a land surface model to look at water and energy balance on the land surface, and an atmospheric model. What does it mean? We could use a model like this to predict how changes in groundwater could influence wind speed. And actually people have done it. Reed Maxwell, now at Princeton, doing, one of the main developers of these models. But of course, when you have a simulation systems like this, it takes a long time to run, and I'm not an atmospheric modeler. So as a hydrologist, I'm just looking at the connections between the land surface and subsurface hydrologic system. So using power flow for the Kauai River watershed and forcing the model with different forcing data, you would see that, depending on the meteorological product that I use, there would be a lot of variability in the prediction of a snow water equivalent in the mountains. Similarly, there is also quite a bit of variability in evapotranspiration when we are comparing our simulations with remotely sensed ET products. We also do comparison with the stream gauging stations across multiple locations in the network. And I should say that these are just using some sort of a default hydrologic parameters in the model. So we cannot do any type of calibration because these models takes a long time to run. On average, 1 year of simulation could take 24 hours on a high performance computing cluster with 64 cores. So it's very expensive when you are trying to simulate all these processes. But one interesting feature is, it's a very long talk. I just want to emphasize that the uncertainty in precipitation products will influence the partitioning of the precipitation to various water balance factor, particularly runoff and ET. And if we add the uncertainty in precipitation and temperature together, this uncertainty is going to be higher. What is the solution? I don't have an answer. We need to have better meteorological products. As a simple way, we just say, get all the available data set that you could get and just take the average of them. But of course, we could work with a statistician to develop more better approaches for integrating these multiple products. What is going to be the impact on groundwater recharge, which is my interest? You can see that depending on the product, I could basically get a lot of variability in my recharge predictions, and result of power flow showed me in this catchment, I will get more mountain front recharge compared to mountain block. That means that more stream flow will be generated that infiltrates in the Piedmont compared to this lateral subsurface flow. I cannot verify that because it's very difficult to measure groundwater recharge. So therefore, I hired a postdoc, Dr. Armengol. She's a geochemist, and we started looking at a network of observations, groundwater chemistry data across the number of wells in the Kauai River watershed and the one next to it, the Tule River watershed. Using the chemistry data, we tried to identify what are the main flow paths that are coming from mountains to the valley aquifer. So the result of our analysis showed that the shallow flow paths are mainly composed of calcium bicarbonate water, and deeper flow paths are sodium bicarbonates that are impacted by the weathering of the granite bedrock. So using this information from the geochemical data, we developed a mixing model to quantify the contribution of mountain front versus mountain block recharge. And the result of geochemistry showed, well, more than 50% of recharge is mountain block. So now I'm going to research in my group contradicting myself. My model showed there is more mountain front. Geochemistry tells me more mountain block. Which one is the truth? You're always looking for the truth. So we're like, okay, let's go to our funding agencies, National Science Foundation. We got a new grant funded in 2020. It's been a couple of years now, to establish a new monitoring network in the Kauai River watershed in the headwaters. So we have 11 sites where we do monthly stream flow sampling. We are working with the community scientists to give us water, to measure water level in their wells, in the domestic wells. Also, give us samples at a monthly time scale. And they are very committed to understand the processes. And then we are integrating these geochemical data with hydrometric observations to understand the processes in the mountainous environment. So the first step that we had to do is to change the geological model of the Parflow CLM, and that's the work by Juan Acero in my group, and then run the model. But then comes the next challenges. We are working in a system, you know, in the Valley Aquifer, there is lots of groundwater pumping is happening. So therefore, our predictions in the Anthropocene is becoming more challenging. We don't have enough data on the pumping rate. Actually, farmers in California do not report how much water they pump. We don't know about type of irrigation system and their rate, surface water deliveries, and of course, subsurface properties. That's why I collaborate quite a bit with Daniel to give me and provide me with approaches to better parameterize subsurface hydrologic system. Where we are now with our modeling framework, we have added all these processes and a lot of uncertainties after running the model for 2,000 years. Now our error in the groundwater level predictions is about 12 meters. And this error caused by lack of information, mainly about these processes that you see here. So where we are headed? Future of integrated hydrologic modeling lies in the integration of models, and actually multiple models that capture different components of the hydrologic systems. These are biogeochemical models, geomorphological evolution models, models that actually treat the soil system as a dynamic system, and couple all of these together with modeling approaches to predict the future of hydrology in the world. But also, water resources management can not be only done by the hydrologists. We have always multiple stakeholders that have different interests. So we need to work and collaborate with social scientists, economists, our colleagues in petroleum engineering and working on the energy productions and agriculture, of course, to resolve water resources issues. And to conclude my talk, just these hydrological processes are very complex, and we need holistic approaches and multiple types of data, geophysical observations, geochemical observations, and numerical modeling framework to better understand our hydrologic system. Of course, I didn't have time to do all of this work, so I want to thank the current members of my group and former members who contributed to all these publications, postdoctoral scholars, graduate students, and undergraduate students, and of course, funding agencies and community partners that help us to collect data, and National Park Service give us access to get sampling done in various sites. With that, I'd like to conclude my talk, and thank you very much for your attention. Thanks. Happy to take any questions. Sorry, a lot of information. Yes, so the groundwater drought is specifically relates to the depletion in the aquifer as a function of droughts, because when there is a drought, there is not enough rain, so you have less recharge getting to your aquifer. However, the aquifer also, there are certain discharges from the aquifer system. Of course, the main one in Ogallala, there is pumping happening, there is, transpiration from groundwater system and so forth. So the depletion is a general term that could be caused as a result of climate, because as a result of drought, less water gets to the aquifer. Also, if you do more pumping, of course, we deplete our resource. And separating how much depletion come as a result of drought versus pumping is a difficult task. That's why in the study that I showed, we just use the well network that are not impacted by pumping. Does it make sense? So in the Ogallala, basically, the way that we could, in my view, separate the depletion from climate impact versus pumping is to do numerical modeling. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Second part of it, like you couple the meteorological drought with the hydrology, right? And you showed the lag time. Now, it is also true that lag time has ranged, you mentioned several months, based on stream flow or base flow lag time or groundwater lag, right? But can you separate this lag time based on the natural system and managed ecosystem, right? Because it is system in a managed ecosystem because of this. So what could be the like agroecosystem? Can you separate that?
That's very difficult from the observations. That's why I think maybe, and we are doing now some just numerical experiment, assuming if you are using an integrated model that look at surface, subsurface, we could look at that, but from observations it's very difficult. But of course, it would, as you know, we could say that it takes longer to recover because, for example, in California, we had the droughts between 2012 to 2016. Pumping during that time was significantly high. So we still haven't recovered from that. I can't say with certainty, but how long would it take to recover? I don't know. It depends. And can I make a predictions? Even with a numerical model would be very difficult because I don't know what farmers decide to do, you know, in terms of what type of crops are they going to plant or what are the policy implications. For example, now in California, because of, you know, the SIGMA Act, they are asking farmers to maybe fallow some lands. How much resistance are going to be? So that's why becomes the predictions becomes more difficult in the managed systems.
Another thing, professional part, like why do agriculturists care about base flow lag? Because we are groundwater dependent in main, right? So that's surface water and right? The base flow, stream flowing. So why do we care?
Why should we care? Yes, because so this goes even with the pumping, because, you know, based on our water rights, you say, okay, I own this land, I have the water rights to the groundwater, I can pump as much as I can. But the thing is that the cone of depression will be propagated to the stream nearby and causing a stream depletion. In the policy and the legal, there is this dispute. If you are reducing groundwater as a stream flow as a function of groundwater pumping, do we need to apply surface water rights or groundwater rights? I don't know. I'm not the lawyer, but we need to care about, because if we need to having a watershed perspective, you know, because we are all a community that try to supply water in a watershed for major users. If the agriculture say, well, I pump how much I want, I don't care how base flow, which is basically groundwater contribution to a stream, is changing, we cannot work like that. That's why the issue of cooperations come to play, right? That whatever our behavior basically impacts our neighbors. And the other thing is that if you continue, pumping groundwater, that's what got actually California depletion. Wasn't very important for them. If you continue pumping groundwater in the way that we do, there are other environmental implications for it. The main one is the land subsidence. That could influence our infrastructure. That's actually the point that got the legislator to pass SIGMA. If you say, oh, the rivers are going to droughts and there is not much enough water for the salmon, they may not care. But the subsidence would have impact. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And so these watersheds, again, we are looking at, natural systems. So none of those wells were in, agricultural land because of a lot of pumping often is happening. And yes, that's one of the shortcomings of this research, that we are not incorporating human activities, or yes, because the drought lag could be also impacted what type of vegetation you have. So we didn't, that's the next step. Okay, more difficult, yes, next step for this research. Thank you. Yeah. That's a good question. So we had the soil properties data and incorporated in the random forest model. Those properties didn't, ranked as highly important, but that doesn't mean that they are not important. And that goes back into, I talked about uncertainty of precipitation, although we have a lot of, weather stations that we could use and satellite product. How could we characterize soil hydraulic properties at a high spatial resolution? That's the answer we want the pedologist and our new postdoc, Matt Amato, to answer. That's the challenge. So the data that we used didn't show that there is a strong control, but I agree with you. If the soil properties are changing, that will impact recharge rate, and yeah. But we don't have what is the most reliable soil hydraulic properties data set at the continental scale? We use Polaris, which is a 30-meter product created from the Sergo data. But again, a lot of modeling goes through it. It's a nice map that we get, but how realistic the values, I don't know. It's the role of the students and postdocs to develop better products, right? So these are future opportunities for research. Daniel.
But you showed that the groundwater drought about stuff like that. Whereas base flood droughts, which are being fed by the drought, have a much shorter lag time. So why the discrepancy if it's being generated from groundwater based on why would there be such a discrepancy?
That's a good question, because that's not a discrepancy in this scale. So the groundwater lag time were computed using well observational networks. So you have a point measurements. You could say, what is the radius of influence that well, while the stream flow one, we are looking at the catchment scale. So it's a larger area that we are looking at. So the response of a stream flow doesn't relate on how one single well in the catchment basically respond. It depends on the flow path of the entire system. And in that case, for the stream flow, because a stream flow is a integrated measure of catchment response, actually the groundwater provides some sort of a buffering capacity that, responses become faster. Yes. Exactly. So if we were doing this study, the lag time of groundwater within a single aquifer, the lag times might be different, because also it integrates the flow path. But we never had a, single aquifer system that we had multiple observation wells to look at as a integrated manner. Yeah. Exactly. Yes, so we could use these models basically for generating hypotheses. In the industry, or maybe the National Weather Service mostly think of using models for forecasting. Okay, do I have enough water this growing season to irrigate my crops? But as a scientist, we are also interested, can I capture, because we put the physics together in these types of process-based models. If I put all the physics that I know, can I capture the response? If I'm not getting the response correctly, it may be I'm using the wrong data, or I'm lacking certain processes in my model. And separating those also challenge. So yes, needs more research, and people use Bayesian approaches to look at uncertainty in the input data, in the model structure, in the model parameters. That's good. It keeps us busy. Keeps us. Yes.
Calibration.
That's a good question. So we do a little bit of a manual calibration, but not much. In general, I mean, you saw for the latest one for power flow, groundwater level observations initially was 30 meters difference, but then through, improving the input data and parameterization is now about 12 meters, and latest data I saw on Monday was about 8 meters. So we could get there. The other thing we try to do is this multi-criteria evaluation. So we try to look at multiple variables, not only a stream flow. We have, a snow water equivalent data from the satellite. We have ET data, and then of course we have a bunch of in situ observations. So we try to use multiple observations because the model may be producing a stream flow correctly, which it did actually for the power flow. When we run the model, stream flow was fine, ET and SWE was fine, but geochemistry data told us mountain block recharge should be higher. So we went back and now changing the conceptual representations of the model. So we need, okay, I want to advocate multiple types of observations at multiple type of scale, at multiple scales.
Number of parameters.
That's a lot. And yes, and do you know, like the soil properties that, we are running this model even at a kilometer resolution. So that's why some people are talking about using surrogate modeling approaches, basically try to build the emulator of the power flow, try to calibrate that, that surrogate model that runs faster, and then do parameter transfer. I haven't done that. We had proposals, didn't get funded, working with computer scientists. So that again, another area that, with the advancement in AI technology, we could work to enhance the calibration process. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So that's way that, the observational data, and actually in the United States, we are lucky because we have, long-term monitoring networks for 50 years. We use groundwater observation for 30 years, daily resolution. This is incredible data set to have. That's where the role of numerical models come into play. So if I can make my model to work and represent the historic condition, then the question is, can I use that as a prediction framework to the future to know how, the system would respond? What we do as a hydrologist, we have been using, projections from global climate models, which also they don't agree. So what we do, we run multiple realizations. We try to use land use change models to see what happens in the land system. Okay, maybe we're starting from grassland. Maybe in the future, we may have more trees or vice versa. The thing that we have been ignoring and is an emergent research area is the dynamics of the soil system. We have been assuming the soils are static in time. That's why I've been working with Daniel, trying to capture this dynamic nature of the soil. And I'm like, okay, you are making my life complicated. Now I need to, not only think about climate and land cover, now I need to, and how often these things are changing. So some people, they say, well, this seems then you have a lot of uncertainty, is maybe not do anything. But I think we cannot just not do anything. At least, although we are getting a range of responses, at least the uncertainty bonds that we could operate under. Right, but that's a good question. So we don't know, and so we could use these tools and to make some predictions. We expect might be worse in the future. This lag time would be longer because it would have more severe and warmer droughts. Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay.
Thank you so much again for your attention and great questions, giving me a lot of ideas for applying for funding. Thank you, everyone.